The interesting thing is, 50% of doctors now, 50% of attorneys, I think now, are female, whereas only 6% of airline pilots are women.
Welcome to Superpower with Kristine Milkovich, the podcast where we help you unleash your inner hero. Whether you're a change maker, a trailblazer, or just looking to level up, this is the space to uncover your unique superpower and transform it into unstoppable momentum. Join me as we dive deep with inspiring guests, sharing their game-changing insights, empowering us all to be the hero of our own stories. Get ready to embrace your deepest purpose, own your power, and change the world one bold move at a time. I think we have all heard the term flying at 30,000 feet used for so many things. It could be an overview, a conversation, a theme, or just kind of a slang that we tend to use in popular culture. Well, today's episode did fly at 30,000 feet for many, many years. One of the initial first female commercial aviation pilots. This guest has so many exciting stories to tell and talk about resilience, courage, and vision to take on a leadership role in a male dominated industry, a male dominated craft, and the things and the experiences that she forged through, certainly in the 70s, to make her way. Tune in. This is such a treat. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode. This is such an exciting episode. I am actually meeting our guest that I'm about to introduce literally here in the show recording studio and on video for the first time. I had the great honor and pleasure of meeting this very esteemed woman through my mother, Nancy Ferry. And I've been teasing that I'm going to start paying Nancy some finder fees because she has some incredible humans in her network and in her community. And so I'm just very, very honored and privileged to be making this introduction. So without further delay, Stephanie Wallach, welcome to the show, Superpower.
Thank you. It's good to finally meet you. We've had a lot of back and forth in the last couple of
Yes,
months.
we have. You have been incredibly patient with me. I took a well-needed 2.5 week international vacation, and I was just nutty enough to think maybe we could record while I was abroad, but that got a little bit complicated due to my lack of international skills, which is something you've built a career on, which we're going to get to in a minute. But couple things, Stephanie, since you're a first-time guest here, and I always like to share, particularly because you and I are new to each other, this passion project of mine, Superpower, the podcast, Unleashing Your Inner Hero, is really kind of a new baby. It's a new startup. It is a bi-weekly show. And so I'm just so honored and privileged, you not really knowing me that well via my mother, that you were so kind, first of all, to say yes. And you put this trust in me for the next 40 minutes. I really take that very seriously. For yourself and for folks just tuning in, Superpower is all about meeting, identifying, and spotlighting local heroes like yourself. And what that means to me, the curator of the show and the overriding message of the show, is, if there's one thing I maybe have figured out at 54, Stephanie, is that many days it takes tremendous courage just to get out of bed, quite frankly. But number two is to do some really audacious, cool, edgy things in life that maybe aren't being done every single day. And from the research I've done on you, I certainly took my mom's grain of salt. She thinks you are one of the best things since sliced bread and just has beautiful things to say about you. But
Oh, well,
yeah,
thank you.
she really
Thank you.
did. And again, I can't wait to build deeper community with you. But for the sake of this show and this 40 minutes, of course, I read and I research. And, I like to say I'm a pretty good stalker because that's part of my job, certainly as a real estate broker, to learn about people and take great care of them. But for this show is to learn about who you are and who my guest is and what might it be that we talk about. So that being said, take us back, Stephanie. You are one of the initial I would say starters of female professional pilots in the commercial aviation lane, career lane, profession, livelihood, exploration, all the things that I can imagine we're going to talk about. But Stephanie, take us back. Like, I've seen Newsweek articles and all kinds of press online from your very illustrious professional career, but for myself included and our listeners that are just meeting you, tell us how you got your start and what sort of triggered your imagination and your desire to get into that career.
Well, I had a rather different start than most pilots, I think, and most female pilots. And I found that out when I first started to get together with other women pilots. My mother had always joked around the dinner table, almost threatened, I'm going to go get a pilot's license. I'm going to go get a pilot's license. And we'd all laugh, laugh, laugh. My mother was a nurse. She was a school nurse. It was kind of a joke. Yeah, mom's going to go get a pilot's license. And I don't know whether that somehow got stuck in my brain somewhere,
Interesting.
and I don't know whether that was why the fire got lit so instant. It was sort of almost spontaneous combustion. I never thought about becoming a pilot, whereas most pilots I know and women pilots always talk about how I knew I wanted to be a pilot from the time I was a toddler.
Right.
Um, and a lot of them came from aviation backgrounds for starters, and that helps a lot. Of course, I did not. So I graduated from college and I majored in French and philosophy, humanities major, and but not a bit practical. And in those days, you could get away with that. So I went to New York. I got a job as an apprentice film editor because it was better than being a receptionist, which was pretty much all the jobs that were offered to me. This was 1968. So I thought, well, I'll do this. At least it might lead somewhere. So I did that for a couple of years, moved up to assistant film editor and made a pretty good living and enjoyed it. I liked it. And then one night I was on my way home. I had a friend who was a filmmaker, lived a couple of blocks away from me. And I thought, I'll stop at Mark's house on my way home. I was walking home. And I knocked on his door and I went in. And he had a friend visiting him. And I had saved some money and I was planning to take a vacation. I love to travel. And so I said to them, what should I do with this $1,000, which was a lot of money in
No
1970?
kidding.
And so I thought, where should I go? What should I do? I have 2 or 3 weeks, whatever it was. And his friend, whose name is Joey Skaggs, I'll put in a plug for Joey here. If you look him up, he's a performance artist, a quite well-known performance artist. Joey said, well, why do you have to go anywhere? Why not stay here and use the time and money to do something you always wanted to do, but never had the time or money to do before? And it just popped into my head to take a flying lesson. I thought, maybe I'll take a flying lesson. And I don't think he said, like taking a flying
Right.
lesson, but I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Sure.
He might have.
Sure.
So I thought, oh, that's a really good idea. So that weekend, I was from Westchester County. Westchester County Airport, White Plains was where I learned to fly. I took a train up to my parents' house. They lived in New Rochelle. Borrowed the car, went up to White Plains, took an introductory flight, which was a half an hour flight with an instructor, and they just fly you around. And I was,
Hooked.
yes, it was like somebody
Wow.
gave me a shot of heroin and then I couldn't live
Isn't
without it.
it was love at first sight.
It was love at first
Oh,
sight. And I knew, I thought, oh my God, where have you been all my
right.
life? I just thought, this is what I want to do. I don't care what it takes. This is what I'm going to do. And that's how it
Oh
happened.
my God. Stephanie, I just got chills from my head to my toes. That's the
Perfectly serendipitous.
sweetest. Wow.
And so I continued working as a film editor to help pay for my lessons, which were expensive in those days, not nearly as expensive as they are now. And then had a boyfriend who was moving to California and wanted me to move with him. And one of his selling points was, you can fly all year round there. And I have a cousin who's a TWA captain, and he's got an
Oh,
airplane. And so off I went to
uh,
California and got all the rest of my ratings, and then flight instructed until, and did a few other things, some charters. I delivered some airplanes here and there, and built my time. Eventually got a flight engineer's rating, which you need it in those days because there were three pilots in most airplanes. There was a captain, first officer, and flight
Okay.
engineer. Most airplanes don't have, none of the modern airplanes have a flight engineer anymore, I don't think. Pilots training now never even heard of a flight
Sure.
engineer's rating. They go,
Sure.
what?
What's
What's flight
that?
engineer's rating? But it was a requirement then. And so I got my flight engineer's rating. And at Burbank Airport, I did grad school at Burbank, and then they were affiliated with United Airlines. I went out to Denver to do the very quick, because it's expensive, airplane ride and simulator work, and got the rating, and then started applying to the airlines. And I got a call from Braniff in November of 75, and went to work there in December.
Wow. So you just got that, like you said, that hit, that like, whoa, where has this passion been? And you just ran with it. You just got all those credentials locked
Yes.
up and went for it. Wow. So, couple things that went through my brain while you were talking. I am a big, big fan of anything as it relates to women's history, and certainly our pioneering ones like yourself that really forged the way. Some call it breaking the glass ceiling, pushing through, being one of the first. There's lots of isms for it. But given that you have just shared with me and our audience a little bit about how you got the idea, and I love that because you're right. I feel like so many people, and I'm going to probably grossly stereotype here, but I'll take the heat on the end. I think folks that go into like engineering or flying or these lanes that tend to be a certain brain, right, and a certain pedigree or caliber of thinking, that is so interesting that it wasn't an influence. It wasn't a necessarily a nurture influencing. It was really just something that sparked you. I love
Well,
that.
I think I always had, and I don't want to overplay this because
Sure.
I don't want to romanticize it, but I think I always had a little bit of an adventuresome
Yeah.
spirit. I traveled. When I was younger, I hitchhiked over, what was it? I can't even remember. I mean, like 20,000 miles in
Oh my
Europe.
goodness.
I I travel. I did it sometimes alone, not often, but I did a lot of things. I took a lot of chances. I kind of liked. I like roller coasters.
Yeah.
I like things that get my adrenaline pumping a little
Right.
bit, and I like new experiences. So that was part of my makeup, I think.
Yeah. Kind of, I call it those little life particles that you just can't explain away, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it came from
Right.
anywhere or anybody. It's just Stephanie. And I love that. I think the more that we can learn to honor that and hear that and feel that at all ages, but certainly at our younger ages, I think is pivotal. So, Stephanie, is there anything explicit that you want to share or that you can share around maybe some barriers that were going on at that time in getting into the aviation lane as a woman and a younger age woman? And this isn't necessarily about a feminist discourse. It's more about how can our listeners have honor and respect and remember that things weren't always as they are today, right? And we could insert a million sociological topics there. But what would you share, Stephanie, in your journey and the start of your career that the younger women today or younger individuals today that are inspired to get into your career, your past career, what would you share about that?
Well, I think speaking to other women pilots now, and I occasionally get together with others that are a few retirees, but a group of women who are still working. And there are online sites where you can listen to, because I don't contribute very much to women speaking about flying now, and airline flying
Sure.
specifically. The stepping stones were much more difficult. So when I was flying, I interviewed. I couldn't even get an interview with a commuter airline at all, or I certainly couldn't get an interview until like the last year and a half. Emily Howell, I think she was Warner at the time. I always forget which one was her maiden name, but She was the first. She was hired by
Mm.
Frontier Airlines in 1972 or
1972,
73.
sure.
And I don't know whether, I don't think she came from an aviation background. I think, oh, I used to know Emily. I think she may have been a flight attendant at some point.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was the first. So I couldn't get a job with a commuter or a corporate. I couldn't even get an interview. I did have one interview at Burbank Airport. I remember I was flight instructing out of Van Nuys Airport in Southern California. I don't even remember for what kind of an airplane it was. It was a jet, which was very exciting because I'd never flown a jet. And I could tell they gave me the interview to check a box
Mm.
because the chief pilot kept asking me if I thought I could throw a 50-pound bag into, he showed me a picture of a cargo hold, it's this far off the ground. Do you think it, or 30-pound, I don't remember over there. And I said, yes. I kept saying, yes, 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 yes. But he kept asking me that question over and over again. So he was looking for a way to get rid of
Mm.
me. And he did. I never heard from him again. And that was the only interview I could
Mm.
get. Now, of course, you can get your ratings, you can get you can go fly the right seat at SkyWest or a myriad of smaller airlines and build up time, build up multi-engine time, build up jet
Yeah.
time. It's much easier to climb the
Sure.
ladder. It was very difficult for me. So I pretty much went from a light airplane pilot, flight instructor to flying, transport jets.
Wow.
But I will say one of the advantages then that the women don't have now, but they don't need it because they've already got experience in some of those more complicated, complex airplanes, is you spent time in the back seat, in the flight engineer's
Mm.
seat. So you spent, in my case, it was 2 years, which was very quick at Braniff. I spent 2 years in the flight engineer's seat of a 727. And so I watched and watched and watched. So after 2 years, I knew I could feel how to fly that airplane. And the guys were great. They'd give me an approach plate. They'd tell me what they're doing. They'd walk me through it. They'd say, no, I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. So when I checked out as co-pilot on the 727, first officer on the 727, I felt like I really could feel that airplane. You
Mm.
know how it
Mhm.
flies. So now when all pilots get hired by an airline, they're thrown right into the right seat of whatever jet, whatever the smallest jet is the airplane flies, because pilots' pay depends on the weight of the airplane. It was an old Railroad Labor Act or something. They
Sure.
set that precedent, and so everybody wants to be on the heavier airplanes generally, unless you can fly captain. People will jump into the captain's seat of any airplane, but
Fascinating.
so you do get experience watching from the back seat, which you don't have now.
So the pathway to get to the front seat, whether you be a female or potentially a marginalized group, is that even in the 70s, you just had to chip away at sort of that advancement list. Like a lot of careers, you have to literally earn your stripes.
It's most of the major airlines, with the exception really of, I think, American Airlines is the only major airline that's always had its own union.
Mm.
All the all the pilots belong to the Airline Pilots Association,
Okay.
and you have a contract with ALPA, and it sets the every rule, and it's strictly a seniority system. When I went to work, the president of CEO of Alaska was Kennedy. I can't remember his first name, and his brother flew for us.
Mm.
And he started as a flight engineer.
Wow.
He didn't get to fly captain because he was the CEO's brother. It's when you get hired, you get the bottom number. You go to the
That's
bottom of the
right.
seniority list, and in your class, the oldest person gets the highest number,
Mm.
and then it goes down. The youngest person gets the bottom number,
Wow.
and then you
Yeah.
progress strictly based on that seniority
Yeah.
number.
Yeah. When you talk about being in the engineering seat and sort of being in, the back of the seats until you obviously eventually got that leadership role, it really does create that skill excellence, right? Like you own every function and every piece and all careers feel more confident, but when you have all these lives in the back, right, that you're keeping in the air, that certainly makes a lot of good sense to me, and it has to feel pretty good for you as the engineer and as the leader. That being said, have you ever, or do you have a moment or a story you'd care to share where, I think of myself getting off planes and getting on planes, and I think how elated. I mean, I'm a very emotional person, so, but I almost tear up from pride and excitement. And quite frankly, I'm just going to say it like it is. I feel really safe and good when I look in that cockpit when I'm walking into the plane and I see a woman, or when I'm exiting the plane and I greet the woman and the captain and I thank them for their work and their service and their time. I get lit up. It impacts me as a 50-year-old female,
Oh,
as a professional,
that's good to know.
somebody that's really committed to social justice and equity and inclusion. That impacts how I felt about that experience. So, that being said, I'm not an anomaly. I can tell you I'm not the only person that feels that way. So, did you ever have any specific experiences, by the way, positive or negative, where folks kind of looked at you like you're the captain, or asked you a question that maybe wasn't particularly respectful, or one that they just showered you with so much respect that you were in that role and had that captain's jacket on?
I flew for 30
Yeah.
years, and with the airline, with one airline. I started with Braniff International, which was my first airline. I started in the end of 75. They filed for bankruptcy in May 12th of 82, a
Mm.
day I will remember forever. And then I came to work for Alaska in September of 83. In between that time, I had a baby.
Mm.
So that took up some of that
Sure.
time off. And now you can get hired by an airline if you're pregnant. Back in those days, there was no way I could apply for a job when I was pregnant.
Wow.
It was out of the question.
Wow.
So I was basically off for that time. But I would say, I don't think I ever had in 30 years, maybe I blocked it out, a passenger get off the airplane and make a negative comment to me.
Great.
Oh, I was going to say I flew captain for 18 of those 30
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
But most of the time, people don't even know that the captain's in the left seat with four stripes and the scrambled eggs, they say. Most people
Yeah.
do, but they don't know. They
Yeah.
think everybody's the captain or
Exactly.
everybody's the co pilot or whatever. But I don't think anybody ever made a negative comment to my
Well, that's
face. But
awesome.
I've I'm sure they did, not to my face, but most of the time
Yeah.
it was very
Good.
positive. And I got some lovely notes from passengers
Oh,
about the kind of thing that you just said about how they felt.
wow.
And a lot of drawings from children,
Oh, I love that. That's so
so
sweet. It's true, when you think before 9/11, again, I'm gonna age myself. When I think of some of my kiddo trips with family or with my father, I have a few photos. Funny enough, you just said that. I actually have them in my photo album of me, like in the cockpit, where my dad took a quick little candid, and it's like, well, those days are those days sure are gone, right?
well, you can do it on the ground,
Okay.
but in the air
Yeah.
it's of
Yeah.
course out of the
Yeah.
question
It's those
now.
it's
But
those romantic moments that so much of, again, 9/11 and different politics right now have
Oh,
kinda
it
shut all
really
that
changed
down.
after 9/11. When I first started flying with Braniff, we occasionally flew with the door
Yeah,
open.
isn't that wild?
You could go back into the cabin. Of course, there were three pilots on the airplanes that I flew with Braniff, but so one pilot could go in the back and
Yeah,
just hang out for 20
sure.
minutes and
Yeah.
walk through the cabin and
Stretch some
chew the fat with
legs, and
everybody, and
yeah,
you
I
know.
know. It's
Uh,
crazy.
but now you're just gonna go
Yeah,
back, go to the bathroom, come back.
exactly. The
It's
romance of engaging with your actual
right.
customers has sort of gone out the door.
And also, it used to be on charters, you could always fly with the door open. And I don't even think you can do that
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
If somebody bought the whole airplane, they would assume that it was safe. I don't know
Sure.
why. You could
Yeah,
still
sure.
They still went, but I don't think they even do
Yeah,
that anymore.
yeah, and these are just testaments to the change of times and different generations, different realities.
And it's too bad because at Braniff, my mother, my father, both flew in the jump seat
Oh
of the
my
727
gosh.
when I was co-pilot. Highly illegal, but
We won't tell. Shh.
statute of limitations or something. And your friends could, your family. I don't think I ever had a friend there. That would have been a little bit too much. But my both of my parents were in the jump seat. anytime a movie star or a sports star or something, you could say, hey, you
Oh
want to
my
ride up front,
gosh.
and you could put them in the jump seat, and it was a lot of fun.
That is really cool, Stephanie. Oh my gosh. The 70s and 80s, they were and 90s, they were all just there was lots of fabulous things going on. I love that. What gosh, do you remember like oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the breathtaking views. Like I have such a romance about being in the air and travel as well. And there's just so many moments where I'm the obviously one of the passengers and I just think what a cool like extraterrestrial thing that we get to be up in this metal tube seeing all these colors and formations. I mean, I really trip out on it in a really good way. What was that like for you? I mean, I can't even imagine being at the front. Like, do you just have so many
Well,
memories?
you of course you get like everything else.
You get into work mode.
You get
Yeah.
used to you after at first, when you first start flying, and certainly when you first start flying
Yeah.
jets and you take off and you're going so fast that especially if you're going through cloud like puffy, I say puffy
Yeah.
clouds, sounds so unprofessional, but little white puffy
Yeah.
clouds that you're going in and out, so you can really feel your speed, and
Wow.
you go and so you can sort of play and with your co-pilot and just say, oh, oh,
Yeah,
oh, oh,
exactly.
oh, because
I
it looks like you're hitting something, and
totally.
it's really
Oh my
fun.
god, I mean, I think about every fantastical movie I've ever seen in my life, and it's just there's just this awe of, like, what a feeling of just empowerment and right? Just this very almost existential experience being that high up and going that fast and
Well, you don't feel it
yeah.
unless you're passing something.
Yeah, totally.
Otherwise it's just an empty space.
Yeah.
You don't feel your speed.
Yeah.
That's why you feel your speed closer to the
Sure.
ground when
Sure.
and going through clouds.
Oh,
But
just so cool. Just something I wanted to ask you. So, what would you say? You've talked a little bit about the differences of getting in the industry in the 70s versus today. And in all due respect, I know you're retired and you're not in it deeply at this moment, but you are in some of these chat rooms or maybe visit some of the journals and individuals that are still in that lane. But what would you say if a 13-year-old girl that is just, has these big hopes and big dreams of getting in the professional commercial aviation lane and what would you say to them or what would be sort of your testimonial about why you loved the career?
well, I mean, I think obviously for starters, you have to love
Yeah.
flying, and you can't be afraid of it.
Sure.
You can't be at all
Yeah.
afraid of it because I think in my career I flew with a couple of pilots who I think were afraid to
Huh.
fly. They were nervous. They were nervous pilots,
Wow.
and their life must have been horrible.
No kidding.
So yeah, so I mean, you could kind of tell, but it was they struggled, and but so you have to love
Sure.
flying. That's the first thing. If you have to be drawn
Yeah.
to it. But as a career, I mean, you can't say enough good things about it as a career, just in terms of the amount of time you
Mm.
work. Certainly, the money. I mean, pay has gone up astronomically, geometrically. Mushroom. Pilots are paid so much more than they were in my day. They've really pushed for better pay, and they've got. So I meet with some of these women now, mostly Alaska pilots, Alaska Airlines pilots, who are flying captain now. And I ask, I just say, what are you guys making now
Mm.
as in the left seat? And they tell me, and I go, whoa,
Yeah.
what do you do with all that money?
Right?
It's like,
No
oh, if only.
kidding.
So you make really good
Yeah.
money, you have good time off. I think it's been almost 20 years for me. So the industry has changed. There may be things that have changed for the worse. I'm not really aware of those. But it seems like these women that I see at these small get
Yeah.
togethers, I've been to a couple of them, and just a couple of them in the last maybe three
Yeah.
years. I'm so impressed with them because most of them have
Mm.
families. They, um, they obviously fly a full schedule. They have horses. They own their own airplanes. They have boats. They're
Full
amazing. They're
lives. Yeah.
amazing. Yes. They're just full of energy. And I think maybe some of it is the they're not struggling at work as much as the first of us were. The struggle when we first started was most of the time not out in the open.
Mm.
It was under the surface. And so you were always on tenterhooks. I had a classmate of mine. So when you get hired, you're hired with a group of other pilots, and it's called your class. And so I got hired with a class of pilots at Braniff. And I was flying co-pilot, so it had to be at least 2 years in. One of my classmates called me and said, "Is it true you cried on an approach into Kennedy? The weather was really bad and you were flying and you started to cry and told the captain you take it." Was completely not
Mm.
true. Completely not true. And I said, "No, of course not. What if I were crying on if I were that afraid of flying that bad weather, I'd quit. I wouldn't want to put myself through this all the time." And I said, "Where did it come from?" And I don't remember whether he told me where he heard it from or whether he wouldn't tell me where he heard it from. But I thought that rumor is probably all over the airline by now. And there's nothing I can do about it. That was the sort of thing that was so hard. And I thought, if they're saying that, what else are they
Right.
saying? And I know that I was the second female pilot hired at Braniff. The first one was Sandy Simmons. And I must have heard from 20 different pilots. I'm making that number up, but a lot of pilots. "Did you hear that Sandy dumped fuel on the ramp?" So as a flight engineer, there was a fuel panel. And if you did something wrong on it, you'd open the dump valves. And on that airplane, you could open the dump valves on the ground. Some airplanes they don't even have them anymore. I don't think on airplanes you don't dump fuel anymore. Or maybe you do on some airplanes. I take that back. But none of the airplanes I flew.
Mm.
But you could do it on the ground.
Yeah.
So you had to be very, very
Sure.
careful you did things in the right
Sure.
sequence. And of course, they said most female pilots that I knew, I heard a rumor that they dumped fuel on the ramp.
Hmm.
So I thought, they're saying it about me too. I knew they were
Mm.
saying it about me because I heard it about every other female pilot.
Mhm.
So that was the kind of thing. And I don't think the women pilots are up against that quite now. The interesting thing is, 50% of doctors now, 50% of attorneys, I think now, are female, whereas only 6% of airline pilots are
Hmm.
women, which is very
Yeah.
strange to
Yeah.
me. I don't understand why women are not attracted to the field. And I've
Mm.
heard people say, well, it's because of the lifestyle, but it can't be that, obviously, because there are many, many more flight attendants and they have the exact same
Well,
lifestyle.
and I was
Exactly
just
the
gonna
same
say every
lifestyle.
doctor and lawyer I know, they work like 80 hours a week, so can't exactly
Well,
do that.
they're not away from
Yeah.
home, but they
Yeah.
say, you're away from home.
Sure.
But flight attendants are away from home
That's
just as
right.
much as
That's
pilots,
right.
and they're twice as many flight attendants.
Yeah.
So that can't be
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
I don't understand why. And I do think that the women pilots who are coming up now, this is from very limited experience, exposure. They seem different than the women pilots, the first women pilots that I knew. The Beverly Bass and she was an American Airlines pilot. Strangely, there were only maybe 15 or 20 female airline pilots in the country. And I was living in a very large high rise apartment in New York City and flying for Braniff. And my doorman, who was kind of a character, said, "There's another woman airline pilot living in the building." I said, "Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah." I thought, she's flying a Cessna 150 to Teterboro. And he kept telling me that. No, every time. I said, "Okay, fine. Get her phone number or give her my phone number," which was a mistake because this guy was not a guy you wanted to give a phone number to. But I gave him my phone number and she called me. And I said, "Do you really live in," they were called there were three towers up like 92nd Street. Anyway, and she said, "Yes, we lived in the same." And what are the
That
odds
is
that of
bizarre.
like 20 female airline pilots in the country, two of them lived in the same
Unbelievable.
apartment building in New York? So we got together, and
Oh.
a year down the road, we thought, wouldn't it be nice to have whatever female airline pilots there are out there together? We wrote a letter. We sent it to every the chief pilot of every airline we could think of, major airline, Part 121, which is the major airlines, not commuters, but the major airlines, and asked them to put this. We enclosed a letter and said, "Would you copy it, put it in the mailbox of any female pilots you have,
Right.
with our contact information?" And we heard back from a bunch of them, and we had a meeting in Las Vegas in 1978, and we formed an organization called ISA, which was the International Society of Women Airline Pilots. And the original there were 21 of us originally. Now it's got, I don't know, I looked it up because I couldn't remember. I'm not active in it,
Wow.
but anymore. But I think I think it might be 900 members, which isn't very many when you consider, like, and I looked this up too, Women in Aviation, which is the biggest organization of professional women pilots, has like 50,000 or something. But that's all kinds of, women in
Oh my
aviation,
gosh.
corporate,
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Sure. All sectors.
commuter,
Yeah.
everything. Whereas this is just for airline pilots.
You started that organization with your building mate.
Beverly and I started that.
Wow.
Yes.
That is so notable. That is huge.
And we've given away over $1.5 million in scholarships to up and coming women pilots, women who want to get more ratings, more experience, more qualifications to get airline
Oh,
jobs.
that is
So it's been a great organization. I will say, when we first started out, true confessions here, when that first meeting in Las Vegas, I was disappointed
mm,
because most of the women there, I'll give you a clue. I wanted to be called the International Society of Women Airline Pilots or whatever. I don't even remember. They wanted to be called I'm not even sure it was international in those days, but the Social Society of Women Airline Pilots. And they were afraid that if they called it anything that sounded professional, that the guys would be offended, or they
mm.
think we were trying to start our own union. And, and I said, and I was the only one who said, no, who cares what the guys say?
Yeah.
We want this group to be a group that supports
Yeah.
women and encourages women, and where we can go and talk, and where we have maybe legal resources if we need them, but start this. And they all disagreed with me.
Interesting.
And it started out as the social group of women airline pilots. I was really disappointed when I left
Wow.
there. It kind of broke my
Yeah,
heart.
of
And so,
course.
but now it's extremely the other way. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
they're very, so, I mean, they're very, not
Just
politically in terms of,
passionately focused about their
on
credentials.
women
Yeah.
pilots. Yes. And helping each other out, supporting each other, talking about issues of specific to
Sure.
women pilot.
Current day needs and current day topics. Yeah.
Exactly, which
Wow.
it wasn't back then. But that was, 1978, and women. I think there were a lot of women who were still, would not call themselves feminists.
Mhm.
My guess is that, I don't know, but I would bet more than half, three quarters of those women would have said they weren't
Yeah.
feminists. So that's the kind of group it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And I came from a very liberal background. I grew up close in New York City, and so I was a
Yeah.
feminist.
Yeah.
And so, I had a different
Yeah.
vision for it, and luckily it has turned into
Yeah.
that, but it's taken a long
Yeah.
time.
Well, just you sharing that even as a young woman, you went into philosophy and art and French, and you sound like you have been fairly expansive and fairly open. And I'll use your words, a liberal thinking person. But, it takes that one individual in a group. And I think, especially in marginalized groups, that there's a reason there's fear, right? There's a reason that people are afraid to speak up, show out, because they're just so afraid of being told no or shut down or shamed or wronged. And sadly, yes, Stephanie, I agree. I think for myself as a fellow female identified adult woman sitting here with you and in front of you as a community member, many, many things have changed. But sadly, so many, particularly right now, and I know we don't have time to get political, and I know we're not focusing on that, but unfortunately, right now, we are still seeing so much backlash and pushback and marginalizing of just basic human rights. And so
Right.
hearing you as one of our mentors, our predecessors, our icons, not only in your career, but just, for me and anybody, if they're even a year older than me, I'm like, what have they gone through that I haven't? Or what can I learn from them? Or how can I be inspired about doing it better? So your story and your footprint and everything that you've done is so important. And you just being so transparent to say, a lot of people in that initial group were scared. They were afraid.
I would
Yeah.
say I was too, but I think I have, I'm a little more,
You're like, we're going for it.
I grew up I had a brother and a sister and we fought like
Yeah.
cats and dogs. So, I'm a
It
fighter,
made you a little tough, right? You have to be.
Right,
Well,
right.
what is that old say? Anything worth doing is going to be a lot of work and probably a lot of heartache at time, but we're so grateful. We're so grateful that you stayed the course and pushed. And you're right, it's not everybody's natural bent to be on the front line. Right. And we get that, right? We need everybody. We need all parties. We need all
Right.
supporters. So certainly I'm not suggesting that here, that, everybody is not going to be the person that pushes and speaks up. But boy, if we don't have those people right at the front of the line, we're kind of
Absolutely.
in big trouble. So I'm just so happy to hear that you were one of those voices. Couple things as we start. I could talk to you for 3 hours. There's just so much I want to ask you. But as we start to slightly wind in and kind of start to bring the episode to a close, there are a couple really important things I do not want to miss. If you are okay sharing, and I'm not even implying like something super dangerous or something mechanical or a near tragedy that was potentially in front of you that you had to navigate. I mean, that's fine if you want to share something like that, but what would be a situation or a moment as a pilot and as the lead and in your career where you had a really tough situation, or maybe there was something that was coming up in your flight or in your mapping or with a colleague that you had to navigate? Is there just a memory or a situation that you could even share high level if it's something that's private? I'm just always thinking like this career is insane.
I would say as a pilot, I'd say the most challenging episodes were not when something went wrong mechanically. The most challenging things I think for most pilots is weather
Mm,
or weather. The
right.
most challenging thing is weather.
That variable
Um,
you can just not be 100% sure about. That makes all the sense in the world.
and I joke about this flight. I had a flight that left it was in the summer and it left at like 6 o'clock in the evening. I was the captain. It flew from Seattle to Spokane and Spokane to Boise. So it's an hour to Spokane, hour to Boise, give or take. So I thought, fine, I'll get dinner. It'll be pretty. The sun won't be in my eyes. So I got everything good about it. So off I go, fat, dumb, and happy to the airport. And I look at the weather, and there's thunderstorms between Spokane and Boise, and they're really bad in Boise, and they're moving in and they're moving out, and they're bad
Yeah.
thunderstorms. They're the big monster ones. So I go, oh damn, I'm gonna have to work on this flight. So and they also have terrible forest fires on that mountain
Mm,
range. What's it called? Just to the northwest or
yeah.
north of Boise
Okay.
Airport. That whole
Yeah.
mountain's on fire. So by the time we get, I think we may have taken a delay because of the weather there and everything was backed up. So by the time we got into Boise, it was
Yeah.
dark and flew into Boise. So we get there and we come in and we have to do a regular pattern. So we come in this way, then we have to make a turn and then land in the other direction. And the sky is just it's completely lit up
Oh,
with thunderstorms, and we're looking at the radar, and there's a thunderstorm. I mean, I don't want to go into too much
yeah.
detail, but there's a thunderstorm south of the airport that's clearly moving towards the airport. And, we're talking about the co-pilot and I like,
Right.
and then that whole mountain. is on fire. It's like
Oh my.
red and yellow, bright red and yellow,
Sounds
and
like
the thunderstorms
Armageddon,
going up from
Stephanie.
here. I
Yeah.
said, we're going into, I said,
Yeah.
we're going into
Yeah.
hell.
Yeah.
Look at the descent into
I
hell
grew up
here.
in the church.
And
I was gonna say this sounds very Book of Revelation. Wow.
it was like the wind was howling. I think the wind on the runway was 50 knots or
Mm.
40 gusting to 50, which I think was legal. We would have
Yeah, that
landed if it
doesn't
weren't
sound fun
legal,
though.
but it wasn't a crosswind. I think, but it was very choppy, and that flight that I thought was going to be just a breeze, the dinner flight to Boise, you know, turned out to be a
I
nightmare, just a
I would
nightmare.
call that a knuckle grinding, seat moment for me as the passenger.
And that's, well, passengers may not have, except for the turbulence,
Yeah,
they may not have
sure,
known.
sure.
You can't see much
Yeah.
out those
Well, and that's a
windows.
testament to who was flying the plane. Oh,
Well, it was pretty bumpy,
wow.
but so
Yeah,
weather is the most
of
dangerous thing
course.
and the biggest challenge for
That's
pilots,
right.
I think.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that.
Mechanical issues, 999 times out of 1,000, there's a checklist for it.
Yeah,
And there's a backup system
yeah,
for it.
yeah.
And it's a do this, 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 and this. Continue on or land at the nearest
Exactly.
suitable
Exactly.
airport. It's,
Well, considering again, this is your lane, but just for me as a consumer, and I'm a decent heavy traveler, and I've traveled in multiple careers for work. You think about the intellectual or the rational side of how many flights, every city, every state, every country,
exactly.
from my own mental health. I just go, well, Milkovich, getting up and crossing the street's a lot more dangerous, or at least that's what I tell myself. So I'm not
It,
surprised that you're saying, as the professional and as the expert, like, the mechanical stuff, unless something just unfortunately goes wrong, it's pretty pragmatic. Yeah.
there's structural
Yeah, that's
damage.
different.
The tail falls off, a
Yeah,
wing falls off, you're in
yeah.
trouble. That doesn't
Yeah,
happen. Or fire, structural damage or a
yeah,
fire, you're
yeah,
kind of in big
yeah.
trouble. Otherwise,
Otherwise, it's
it's
the
not, and
weather.
that
Yeah,
almost
yeah, you
never
just said the
happens.
weather was
And
your
I
culprit.
tell my son, I tell that to my son because my son, believe it or not, I have one child. My son's afraid to fly.
Interesting.
Isn't
Yeah,
that weird? I know it's some deep
yeah,
psychological thing
yeah.
people tell me, but I don't think so. It didn't start with him until he was in his late 20s. And I tell him, like, there's how many tens of thousands of flights a day, and you
Yeah,
never hear a word about any of them,
yeah.
and all kinds of weather. But I say to him, if you're worried about flying, let me check the
There you
weather.
go.
If the weather's good, then you're guaranteed you're going to
You've
make
got
it there.
he's got a great pro literally in his hip pocket. He's
And
so fortunate. I love that. Well, Stephanie, we do work to keep our episodes just hovering at about, 45, 50 minutes. We want people to stay checked in, listen throughout the whole thing, not miss one of these amazing nuggets that you've just shared with us. I am definitely going to have you back because there are so many more things I would love to ask you.
well, I would love to.
And I
Thank you.
earnestly mean that. You have been a delight. I've learned a ton about aviation, professional commercial piloting, your background, so much inspiration and cool just nuggets about your journey.
Kristine, you flatter me, and I do feel like you're overplaying
Oh,
me a little
well.
bit, but thank you. I
I don't
appreciate it.
think so. I don't know. You seem pretty cool in my eyes. But there is a final question that we do shut down every episode with, Stephanie. And it's just a fun one. And it's not to overthink. It's just really kind of what comes from your hip and your head and your heart when I ask you. But, knowing the theme of this show and the tagline is unleashing your inner hero, that is something we lean in on. If you had to choose one superpower that you bring that you brought to your career, your community, that you bring to your life and your family and yourself, and just who you are, how you've shown up in this world. What would that superpower be for you?
I know I can tell you exactly
Yay.
what it is, and I did an interview with our local NPR
Oh,
station.
nice.
Dave Beck. Do you
I
know Dave Beck?
don't,
He used
but
to
I
be at
want
NPR.
to.
He used to be at
Okay.
KURW. Now he's with Classical King. He's a great guy, and I did, and right after I retired. And he actually titled it after it was done was "You Have to Enter to Win." And I've
Oh,
said that to my son. And I think and I do think that was my superpower. I've always said,
enter to win.
if you have to enter to win. If you want something, you have to go and you have to apply for the job. You have to apply for the job. You have to go out and take the lesson. You have to call the person that can do something for you. You just have to. If you don't put yourself out there, it's definitely not going to happen.
Wow. For one, I needed to hear that today. Thank you. Personally, I did.
Okay.
I
Well,
needed to
good.
hear that.
Good. I hope
I
it
needed to
helps.
hear that. You're yet another one of my spirit angels that I keep being blessed with. But that is such a beautiful answer to what is your superpower. It's that old like showing up is half the work, right? And I think it's
Yes.
so easy. I'm going to go back a little bit, kind of the arc of our conversation, whether it be the age you are today, myself, our tech team online, it's easy, I think, to forget that it takes courage to enter to win. It takes courage, it takes faith, it takes audacity, it takes energy. And what a beautiful message that you share that with your son, and that was your answer. I really love that, Stephanie. Cannot be reminded of that enough. Thank you so much.
Well, good. Good. I hope it works for you too, whatever you're doing.
It has done me well in some occasions, and I just needed to hear that again today. So thank you. You have been an absolute delight. I'm going to hit up my mother because selfishly, I want to go to that park and I want to have that ladies' lunch date, and certainly get to know you better and build a deeper community connection. That would be a blast.
Anytime. I'm retired,
Yay!
Kristine.
Lucky
That's what
you.
I do. I lunch. I lunch.
Well, good on you. Thank you so much for sharing, Stephanie. I can't wait for this episode to air, and to the individuals that follow Superpower to learn some more amazing things about you. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll make it easy for others to enjoy it too. You can do that by subscribing, writing a review, and sharing episode links with others. Then you'll be my superhero.